What was the scariest, "we need to leave now," gut feeling that you've ever experienced? Viewing to see a flat that didn't exist. Not my story, but one my mom told me from her 20s when she was living and working in London. I'll do my best to retell it. This story always gives me the creeps, though, when I think about it. So back in her 20s, my mom was living in London and looking to move into a slightly bigger place. She'd found a really good price for a flat slightly out from the area she was hoping. She'd called the agent to book a viewing, and that's when things turned odd. So the guy booking the viewing started asking weird requests and questions, such as to bring her passport, her age, race, and physical appearance. Would she be coming on her own? Did she have a car, or would she be getting the bus? He very persistent that she should arrive by bus as it would be easiest for her. Explains it was a straight road down from the bus stop to the apartment block. Obviously quite unnerved by this call, but still interested because the flat looked ideal. She and my dad, who were dating at the time, decided to check the exterior and surrounding area. The day before the viewing, they drove there. First, passing the bus stop, he was indicating her to arrive via. From the bus stop, there was about 150 to 200 meters of derelict wasteland that she would have to walk past to get to the flat. And standing at the end of the street in the location this apartment block should have been was a huge abandoned building. Smashed broken windows, graffiti, no entry signs. The lot. Definitely nothing inhabitable in sight. Still, when she tells this today, you can see how much it shook her. Of course, she didn't go to her viewing. However, she informed the police, advising them of the planned time and place. From what she saw, from following up with them, they didn't appear to take this tip seriously, and little was done. A couple years later, though, while in a pub with some friends, she gets chatting to a guy she just met through mutual friends that night. He was a police officer, and through conversation her story came up. He said that area at the time of her viewing had a huge human trafficking problem. Still gives me chills to this day. When I was a little boy back in the early 70s, we lived on a small hobby farm in central New Jersey. One night there was a huge storm with thunder and lightning. We were gathered in the family room when there was the loudest bang I'd ever heard in my short life, accompanied by a blinding flash of light. The power didn't go out, but the light bulb in the floor lamp next to the chair where my father had been sitting moments before had exploded into hundreds of tiny shards. There was the acrid smell of an electrical fire, but it wasn't coming from the lamp. I asked my father, "Is the house on fire?" "Yes," he bellowed back at me. I started running for the door, but he grabbed my arm and yelled, "Don't move." I was terrified, and in my 5-year-old mind thought I was about to perish with my parents in a conflagration we could easily have run out of. I became hysterical. My dad released his hold on me, but my mom grabbed me as I again tried to run for a door. I said, "Stay put." My dad shouted. I started sobbing that we were all going to die, and yelled something back at my dad that he was going to kill us all. He didn't take it well. What I didn't understand at the time, and not until many years later, was that the house was clad in aluminum siding. My dad was an electrical engineer and understood that if the house had sustained a direct lightning strike, it would have become a huge capacitor that would have discharged tens of thousands of volts through any watery, ion-filled human that contacted both the house and the wet ground just outside the door. As it turned out, the hit wasn't direct. Lightning had struck a huge maple at the back of our sheep paddock about 200 feet from the house. I went out the next day with my mom to explore and still remember seeing the remnants of the exploded tree scattered across the entire paddock. The fragments were bone white, bleached by the sap having been boiled out the instant the lightning struck. And the burning smell inside? It was an electric shaver my grandmother had given my father the previous Christmas. It was charging above the bathroom sink, and of course there was no such thing as a GFCI outlet. At least nobody had them back around 1972. I was freshly married in my early 20s, living in Fallbrook, California. My ex-husband was a Marine and was at work, and I was driving home from visiting family further south. In order to get into Fallbrook, you have to travel along this long, dark, and windy street called Mission Road. It's already a super dark night, about 11 p.m., and it's a little foggy as well. I'm slowing down and coming around this slight bend in the road, and all of a sudden the hair goes up on my neck, and I feel incredibly anxious. About 5 seconds later, a young woman jumps out of the brush directly ahead of me, maybe 50 feet away, on the left-hand side of the road, while waving her arms in the air and gesturing frantically for me to pull over. I swerved a bit to the right, slowing down even further, but I did not stop. She was young, maybe early 20s or even late teens, and a little dirty, and I was immediately conflicted over continuing to drive. But something told me not to stop under any circumstances. I got further up the road, slowed a little more, and dialed 911 with one shaky hand. The dispatcher said she'd send someone to check, but encouraged me not to feel badly. Apparently, there had already been calls about this girl over the last hour, and they were unable to find her when police followed up. I heard a few weeks later about some carjacking and robbery attempts in the area. Very relieved, I listened to my instincts that night. I was an infantry platoon leader in Afghanistan. One night, we were on a foot patrol along the outskirts of a town where we were concerned about Taliban activity. I decided to move in closer to get a look at the place without worrying about the people of the town coming and going, which is always stressful. It was about 3 a.m., so everyone was asleep. It was completely silent. My interpreter carried an FM radio that he used to monitor non-secure traffic, which is how the Taliban tended to communicate back then. We hear something in Pashto on his radio, and he very calmly turns to me and says, "Sir, they are saying the ambush is set." I immediately got on my radio and told my squad leaders to halt, and we pulled back and got the hell out of Dodge. That was probably the most puckered I have felt in combat. I am convinced that interpreter saved several lives that night, and when he messaged me during the fall of Kabul asking if I could get his family out, I called every contact I could think of to make sure he got on a flight. They currently live in Seattle where he works in IT. Years ago, I was at a club with some friends. I was at the bar, and for some reason looked down at the other end of the bar and saw two guys quietly arguing. They tried to keep from being overheard, but I saw their agitated face. I went back to my group of friends and told them we should go. This was a popular club, and it took us forever to get in, so they didn't want to leave. I don't know what came over me, but I picked up my friend's girlfriend, who was barely 5 feet tall, and started walking to the door. She was kicking the entire time, and the rest of the party followed me outside, telling me to put her down. When we got outside, we heard the distant pop pop and people screaming. We looked at each other for a second, then ran for our cars. I forgot to put her down and was still carrying her over my shoulders. Update. Dang, I didn't think this would blow up. It was the early 1990s, and we were at a club in Miami. If I recall correctly from the local news, it was a drug deal that went bad between two groups. No one was killed, but they wounded each other and a couple of innocent people. LOL, I'm still not carrying her today. The legends are false. Those two eventually got married, and they mentioned me in their speech, something about the other groomsmen holding me back so that I don't get the urge to carry her across the doorway. Good times. My little brother and I were tossing a baseball around near dusk at the bottom of our property, 30 wooded mountain acres way in the middle of nowhere. It had gotten dark enough that we were just about to call it quits when we heard the single most horrifying scream we've ever heard coming from the trees just beyond the edge of the clearing. Imagine a woman screaming in mortal agony, writhing in the most wretched torment imaginable. Every tortured scream from horror movies, war movies, anything you've ever heard. Nothing compared to this. Even now, decades removed from hearing it, the hair on my arms and neck stands up just thinking of it. And it's made even worse by the realization of what it actually was. A mountain lion. Full-grown female mountain lions scream loudly when they're in heat, and it sounds like a human woman being torn to pieces by the devil himself. To hear that, two kids alone in the dark, in the middle of nowhere, was about as terrifying as it gets. I grabbed his arm and ran, scrambled, or maybe fear levitated up the hill faster than ever before or since. It's been 25 years, and I still haven't fully unpuckered. My wife and I used to live in rural exurb outside a large metropolitan area. We were on an interstate about halfway between the city and our home when my wife, who was 6 months pregnant, started having contractions. At the next off-ramp, I turned around and headed back towards the city, planning on heading for an emergency room. I took the very first exit on the outskirts of the city. It was pretty desolate. The only thing on the 2-lane road were a couple of rock quarries that were empty after dark. There wasn't much light on the winter-darkened evening. I pulled into a gravel turnout just south of the off-ramp, pulled to a stop, leaving the engine running, and turned my full attention to my wife. A few minutes passed before my attention was grabbed by a car parked across the turnout, turning their headlights on with high beams. My wife grabbed my arm and said, "We've got to get out of here." And I was like, "Yeah." So I dropped it in gear and hauled but down that 2-lane road towards the city. The other car gave chase for a while, but I was flooring my car. I drove a Dodge Stratus, Eventually, we got into civilization, and the other car turned around and fricked off. We spent the night in the hospital, narrowly avoiding the premature birth of my son. He's 17 now. We guessed I didn't notice that my headlights were shining on a drug handoff, my attention being on my wife, and it pissed the other people off. But who knows? Crazies are everywhere. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep growing and sharing fun and interesting stories from your favorite subreddits. Thanks for watching.